professor at Bridgewater State University, and I run a center there. And the center is staffed by students and faculty. And what we do is we go around to K through 12 schools around in the United States, and mostly in Massachusetts, but not exclusively in Massachusetts. And we help them train all kinds of people. So we train students, we train faculty, we provide curricula and games and all kinds of educational materials for schools around social problems and social conflict. We have a particular expertise in digital technology, which is most of what I'm going to focus on tonight. I'm going to show you some of our research, and we also deal with other people. So for example, we train pediatricians and judges and law enforcement and social workers and other groups like that who are stakeholders. So I'm going to start tonight by telling you basically what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to start by talking about myths, things that we know are wrong, and things that might be holding you back from helping your kids with these issues. Then I'm going to talk about 4 things that we want to sort of think about. And this is work on sort of how to wrap your mind around technology use in kids today and how much it affects them. Then I'm going to talk about how to address these and what to actually do and some takeaways that you can do. So you're going to actually have a better idea when you leave here tonight about exactly what it is you could do to help you cope with some of these things. Now, I have to tell you, these are difficult problems. They are not easy problems as a parent. I have 3 kids of my own, and I do this for a living. My husband teaches computer science, so you think like that we were the best prepared parents in the world to deal with this, but it's still been really difficult. It really has been. I think a lot of parenting, you look back on your own childhood. For a lot of parenting, you use what happened with your parents as sort of a guide on how to handle things. But there's no guide when it comes to digital technology. We don't have anything to look back on. And that makes it really, really difficult. Okay, so let's talk first about myths that might be getting in your way and might be sort of holding you back. Things that we know aren't true and don't work. So these are coming back, by the way. I saw one of these for sale, I can't believe it. But anyway, so the first myth is the idea that you are dope about technology, that your children know everything and you know nothing, and you have nothing to contribute in this manner, and that you should just give up and go away and let them do what they want because they're going to figure out how to spin circles around you anyway. And that really is a myth, because a lot of what has to do with helping children deal with technology really has to do with life experience more than knowing what button to push. And it's really important to understand that. So your sensibility, your sense of how to behave in certain situations is going to come in very valuable, even though you may not know what buttons to push. So don't be held back by that sense. Another myth that can definitely get in the way with parenting around these problems is the idea that if your children experience any meanness from a peer, online or in school for that matter, any experience, it is going to be traumatic and it is going to be damaging. That is not true. If you think about it, think about all the difficult people that you have to deal with, right? The people who are cranky, the people who aren't helpful, the people who are in a bad mood, the people who work against you. There's all kinds of ways that we as adults have to deal with people who can be very difficult. Where do you learn how to do that? You learn how to do it when you're a kid. And you learn how to do it through a little bit of adversity. Now, I'm not saying that it's good for kids to be bullied. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think it's really important to separate the wheat from the chaff here. It's not dangerous for kids to experience a little bit of adversity with peers. It actually helps them learn. It only gets to be dangerous when it gets to be really serious and chronic. I'll talk more about this. Another myth is the idea that this is a telephone. So let's be very clear, this is not a telephone. This is a mobile digital device. It's a computer. And I thought I would show you, for those of you who are too young to remember, but that's a telephone. That's what a telephone looks like. And if you were really, was permanently affixed to the wall with a cord, can you imagine that? You couldn't carry it around. And if you were really fancy, you had a second one in your kitchen with a long curly cord. Remember those curly cords? All right, so this, by the way, is my youngest, and he is trying to figure out how to dial it, which was a very funny exercise. He decided it was like a push button thing, but he thought that the holes, he said the holes like make it hard to push the numbers. You should just take off the plastic part, and then you could really, I was like, no, you needed the plastic part with the holes, but anyway. Another myth that can hold us back is believing that adult predators are the biggest danger that kids face. Now, I'm not here to tell you that adult predators are fake. They're not fake, they are real, and they do exist, and they do exist online. However, the odds are overwhelming that if your child has a problem online with somebody else, it is not going to be an adult predator. The odds are overwhelming that it will be another child, and it will be another child from their school. Kids are really local when it comes to the internet. They don't want to talk to some stranger that they've never met. They want to talk to the kid they just left on the bus 10 minutes ago. That's who they want to talk to. Another myth is the idea that if we were good parents, all of us, we would get rid of all technology, and we teach our kids how to, churn butter and play sports and just get rid of all technology. Now, this is kind of an emotional one, I'm going to tell you. So, obviously, we all know that kids have to learn how to use technology, and to do that, you have to use it. So, I don't think there are many people left who really think that getting rid of technology 100% is a good idea. But you could still sort of feel that way. Like sometimes when I go home, if I see my kids all on laptops, I'm like, I should throw all of those out. If I was a good mother, that's what I would do. And it's really an emotional thing, but it's really important to take a step back and remember that our job as parents is to teach them how to use it. It's not just to prevent them from using it, it's to teach them how to use it, and how to use it in a way so that they are in control of their technology instead of it being in control of them. Another myth is the idea that this is all about teenagers. And this is clearly not all about teenagers. I thought I would show you some of our data on elementary school kids. So these are 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, kids aged 8 to 11. And we've been tracking the rate of cell phone ownership in children this age since 2010. So just to give you an idea of the growth, those are the 3rd graders. And you can see that they've actually doubled since 2013. From 19% to 39% last year. These are the 4th graders, and these are the 5th graders. This is not just about teenagers. In fact, all of the change that we see in the research right now is happening at the elementary level. That's where it's all going on. Another myth is the idea that there are sort of guidelines that you can adopt that will make things really easy. For example, there's one age where you should give your child a cell phone. And I get this question all the time. People say to me, I have an 11-year-old who wants a cell phone. Should I give them one? And I'm going to tell you right now, there is no one age. This is a situation where you have to think what your child is like. And you have to ask yourself, how are they going to use this technology? How willing are they going to be to talk to me about what they're doing and what they're up to? These are all prerequisites. If you're old enough to carry a device, you're old enough to discuss it with your parents and to think about how you're using it. If you don't want to do that, then it's not a good idea to own one. And this really differs child to child. So you really have to think about your child and what they're ready to handle. finally, the last myth is the idea that if you do not give your children what they want, your 11-year-old or 12-year-old, who is the last one on the planet who doesn't own a cell phone, right? Last one. You don't give them what they want, they will be unpopular forever. You will never have grandchildren. You'll end up, lonely little old man, sitting alone, no grandchildren, because you didn't get your child a cell phone when they were 12 years old or 11 years old. And, I really think we have to take a step back and remember that these kinds of arguments have always been used against parents. I remember very clearly my mother not letting me go to a rock concert when I was 13 years old and telling her that I was going to be unpopular forever because of her stupid rules. So you really have to take this with a grain of salt. You are not going to make them unpopular. In fact, we have no evidence that that happens for kids. So you really have to think about whether they're ready and not just about their age and their argument that they're the last people on earth. Okay, now I want to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to give you 4 things that you want to think about when it comes to tech. Okay? And this is going to help simplify it a little and help you sort of wrap your mind around what you need to think about and what you need to keep on your plate sort of on an everyday basis. So the first thing you want to worry about is content, and this is the one you already know. Everybody talks about content. This has to do with what do your kids do online? What do they see? What do they experience? Are they playing video games? What type of video games? Are they, exploring, watching pornography, or looking for pictures, or taking constant selfies? Very common. Those kinds of things. So one of the things that people go for is they really think about controlling what kids do. And I often get this question where they say, I don't want my child to see this content, so how do I control his internet use so he can't see it? And the answer is that control is a pretty difficult ticket right now. Back in the 1990s, you really could control what kids saw online. Odds are, in the 1990s, if you even had a computer in your house, it was a desktop, and it was sitting in your kitchen, or in your living room, or your family room, and you had child control software on it that you went to Best Buy and you bought a CD-ROM and you installed it, and that let you control what websites your child went to. But the question comes up, how common is that today? How much can you really control in today's world, not the 1990s, what kids see? And the fact is that it's not just a desktop in the kitchen anymore, is it? The average American household now has 4 internet-enabled devices. That's the average. Probably in the Northeast it's higher. So we're not talking about one device that's sitting in a public room. We're talking about a device they're carrying around all day in their pocket, or that's in multiple rooms of their family, or one they can carry away. Now, that doesn't mean we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are some kinds of limits and controls you can put on kids. For example, you could consider apps that limit content, and these are some that are pretty good, but don't fool yourself that you're really making content unavailable. You're just making it slightly more challenging to find. So you may control a device, or you may control your network at home. All they have to do is go to a friend's house, or go to the library, or go to school, or go any other place that has a different network. Or use a friend's cell phone, or use a friend's laptop. So there are devices everywhere today. So the idea that you can absolutely 100% control is pretty much gone. But that doesn't mean there's nothing you can do, and there is still things you can do, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. Another thing to think about is, do you actually have to know every single thing your children do online? So a lot of advice tells you that you should know all your children's logins, and you should friend them, and you should watch what they do on their profiles or their social media use. And those are all fine to do. But let me tell you something, if you are going to make absolutely sure that you know every login and you know every app they're using, you better quit your job. Because you are going to be spending all of your time doing this. You know, I was at a talk the other day at a conference, and somebody said, get your kids to write down all their passwords, put it in a sealed envelope, put it away somewhere, and that way if you ever have an emergency, you can get into their accounts. Well, that's great if they never change their passwords, A. And B, it's great if they never pick up a new app. And guess what? They pick up new apps all the time. So keeping up with the change of pace in this is really, really hard. And I think there are better ways to do it. And the way that I really think about doing this, and that I personally have found much more helpful as a parent, and this is one of the things parents have found more helpful in the research we do, is thinking about behaviors rather than specific apps or websites. So instead of like worrying about Ask.fm or Teraha or other things like that, think about what problems kids get into online. So for example, kids might get into problems with websites or apps that promise them anonymity because they think they can't be tracked, And so it's really important to talk to them about the fact that you're never actually anonymous online. It doesn't matter what app you're using. You're never actually anonymous. It's amazing to me how many kids do not know this. They believe the marketing. Also, probably though, the most common problem that we see online is pictures and picture taking and all of the drama and issues that come up around pictures. One of the problems with pictures, and this is a problem that's common to all the apps that have to do with pictures, so this applies to pictures in Instagram and pictures in Snapchat and pictures in Facebook and pictures in everything. The problems are, what are the rules about how to use pictures, digital pictures? So for example, when is it okay to take someone's picture when they don't know it's being taken and post it online or send it to somebody? When is that okay? When is it okay to just take the picture? When is it okay to show it to other people? When is it okay to tag it or send it through a text message? So, see, it doesn't matter the exact app. What matters is the issue of pictures. That's the single biggest source of problems that we see among kids. So when we asked kids, are there any rules about these situations, overwhelmingly they told us there were no rules. They said there are no rules about when it's okay to take somebody's picture or post somebody's picture. There are no rules about that. But then the really interesting part is when we asked them if they thought there should be rules. And most of them said, yeah, there should be rules. So your first piece of homework is when next time you sit down with your kids and have dinner, is to talk with them about your family's rules for picture taking. What is reasonable? What lets you take pictures, have a good time, have fun with your friends, but not hurt anybody's feelings? And it really doesn't matter which app we're talking about. It doesn't matter if we're talking about Snapchat or Instagram or anything else. The issue is, how do you handle picture taking? I'm going to tell you right now, by the way, the rule you're going to come to, because every family comes to the same rule, which is namely that you don't take or post people's pictures unless they say it's okay. The hard part is that you have to stick to the family rule too. So you may have a really cute picture of them in their Halloween costume that you know Granny would love to see, and you may be dying to post it, but if they don't say it's okay, you can't post it. That's the hard part, because we got to stick to it too. Okay, apart from all the content issues, let's talk about displacement. The issue of displacement is, what are kids not doing because they're doing technology? So when they're doing technology, they're not doing other things. And how does that affect them? So for example, how about just hanging out with your friends? Remember hanging out with your friends? I mean, like in person? Does anybody remember doing this? Like you just went and you hung out. Sometimes you had nothing to do. You would look at each other and say, hey, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And the fact is that a lot of the hanging out stuff has gone away. And the play and the hanging out, what it really does for children is it really builds their social skills. And so as this has become displaced into technology, one of the changes we've seen among kids is that their social skills have declined as well. So how do you handle this? The fact that all this hanging out has gotten displaced. What you want to do is you want to set up social situations for your kids. Now, I know that your parents didn't have to do this for you, but I'm going to tell you that because of technology, parenting is different today. And you're going to have to do things your parents never had to do. One of these is you need to set up social situations for their kids, ideally ones that don't involve technology use. And the idea is that you want to give them as much face time with their peers in a fun setting as you can. So if a group of boys want to get together and, go play those old-fashioned video games at the mall or hang out or go to a restaurant, like you want them to have face time with each other that doesn't involve tech so that they can practice their social skills. This is really, really important. Another thing that is getting displaced is sleep. So years ago, we had a girl come through the lab, and she told us about how she was up every night when her parents thought she was asleep, and she was up texting with her friends and playing games and stuff, and her parents never knew. She said they never found out. So we started asking kids about this in our research, and what we found was that more than 70% of the boys and 80% of the girls told us that they text and go online late at night when their parents thought they were asleep. So how do you handle this? I think you guys know, right? The answer is you have to keep devices out of the bedroom. I don't think kids are bad. I think it's tempting. I think if you're a kid today and you're falling asleep and you hear your phone buzz, it's just too tempting. You need to know who's texting you. And asking kids to ignore that is really a tall order. So how do you do no devices in the bedroom? One of the things we asked parents was, what are the techniques that you can use to have no devices in the bedroom? And there were 3 top choices. The first top choice was to have a basket at the foot of the stairs or in the hallway on the way to the bedroom, and you say to your kids, every device goes in the basket. Now, if you use this one, check the basket, because one boy told me that he took his phone out of the case and just put the case in the basket. And he said his mom never checked, and she just saw the case and she thought it was the phone, so check. The second most common thing that parents used was they set up a charging station in the kitchen. This wasn't bad either, except that a number of kids did tell us that they went downstairs in the middle of the night to retrieve their devices from the kitchen. So the most successful strategy, the one that just worked the best, was having a charging station but putting it in your bedroom instead of in the kitchen. Now, if your kids decide that they are going to slither into your bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning like ninjas to retrieve their phone, you have a different kind of problem at that point. Okay, that's not a run-of-the-mill kind of thing. The charging station in the bedroom pretty much defeats, the masses who want their phones. So that one seems to work. Okay, apart from displacement and content, what you see, what you're not doing instead of using tech, let's talk about relationships and how we know technology impacts relationships. Kids have a tendency to overuse the term cyberbullying, and bullying for that matter. And this does actually impact their friendships, because it means that instead of having fights, they have a tendency to throw the word bullying around whenever their feelings get hurt. And that really does impact their ability to learn how to sort of get over a fight and still have a friend. It makes it much harder to do. But when we actually study the problems that happen between kids online and in school, what we find is that most problems are actually fights, not bullying. This has always been true. It is still true today. So most problems, about twice as many problems, are actually fights versus bullying. Bullying is not, a fight is more like a situation where two kids are engaged, they're both upset with each other, they're both engaging against each other, and it's kind of going back and forth between them. Bullying is more like Chinese water torture. Bullying can be very small acts, but it keeps on going. It doesn't stop. And the kid who's the target wants it to stop, but the kid who's the bully doesn't. And it's really the repetition of it going on and on and on that really wears kids down emotionally. So that's a very different flavor from a fight. Now, there are also topics that you can discuss that are going to help kids with their relationships. So one of the things that we wanted to study is we wanted to study what are the problems that kids have online that impact their relationships with their friends and with their family. One of these topics has to do with what they post. So it's not unusual for kids to tell us that they have a problem with somebody who used to be their friend because they posted something about them, but they didn't intend them to ever see it. They were sending it to other kids. And somehow it got back to the person who they were talking or gossiping about online. This is a very common scenario. And one of the things that is really striking to me is how often kids know that the internet's not private, but they still post things that they don't want people to see. There's a couple reasons for this. One of them is certainly that many apps market themselves as anonymous. So that's actually a marketing device. And nobody's ever really anonymous online because your IP address is always logged, but people think you are. People think they are because these apps market themselves that way. Another thing that we know really impacts your perception of privacy has to do with where you're physically located. I'm sorry, I don't know why the picture's not showing up, but where you're physically located. And if you are talking or chatting with your friends and you're sitting at home in your bedroom or in your living room, you feel really private and safe because of where you're physically located. And that leads kids to say and do things to each other they would not do normally under other circumstances. So we have to talk to kids about the fact that your brain can sort of trick you in a way. If you're sitting at home, your brain can say to you, go ahead and do it. Nobody's ever going to see it. But the fact is that if you're putting it online, it's never private. Other things that we know increase inappropriate sharing. In middle school, one of the most powerful factors is when kids are in a group. So when kids are in a group, they're really likely to do something to somebody else or to share. In high school, one of the biggest factors is if they're drinking or taking drugs or if they're really upset. Either one causes people to tend to impulsively do things online they wouldn't do otherwise, to overshare. The other thing that is really important and that predicts people oversharing, interestingly, is using a small screen. So we did an experiment where we showed kids the same data on lots of different kinds of screens, and we asked them, when you were responding to this question or to these conversations, which of these devices felt more private? And you could say they almost all said that the cell phone felt the most private. And as you know, and as I know, cell phones are the device of choice today. So they're particularly likely to make you feel like what you're doing will never be seen. So we really have to make kids aware of this. Now, as I pointed out to the teachers this afternoon, there are lots of examples of people who have made this mistake. It's not an uncommon mistake. But that's partly because we're just learning about this, so we're just beginning to understand how perceptions change and why that's important. Okay, other things about relationships and technology that could really help. One of of the most important things that we can teach kids is that talking about social problems helps. You don't have to know every app they use, and you don't have to have all the answers. You know, kids come to you and they want to talk to their parents about these issues, but they don't necessarily believe that you should have all the answers. And what we find is that just talking about things actually really helps kids. It makes them feel more resilient, even if they don't come up with a solution right out of the box with their parents. One of the things we did was we wanted to look at how discussion with parents helps kids. And so we did a study on older teenagers, and we asked them to look back on their adolescence. So we said, look back on like middle and high school and think about what you talked with your parents about. Did you talk with your parents about your social situation, your digital use, what you did online with your friends? And if you talked to your parents, did it help change your behavior at all? So the first thing we found was, astonishingly, 45% of the kids in the study told us they never talked with their parents about anything having to do with their social lives, including online socializing. Never. They never discussed any of these issues. But of the kids who did talk with their parents, about 2/3 told us it actually really impacted what they did. So it really helped them feel more resilient, it helped them stick with their friends better, it helped them do smarter things online. So I think you have to have a little bit of sort of the confidence that, you know, your kids may be sitting there while you're talking to them and they may be rolling their eyes and looking at you like you have 3 heads. But in the long term, just talking about it, even if you don't have a solution, is really going to help them. And you have to understand that, and you have to believe it. And I think there's good evidence to show that. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about with technology, per se, before I talk about what we're actually going to do, is I want to talk about brain and emotional health. So, hardware changes equal behavior changes, right? So we know that behavior changes when hardware changes. Do you guys remember, does anybody remember texting one of these? Remember that? It was pretty challenging. It took a long time to peck out each word. You couldn't even really peck out each word. It was so slow. But, you know, doing that on a smartphone is completely different. And it's really important to understand that. We need to talk to our kids, too, about how the media industry gets to them emotionally. This is like when I was a kid and I learned about how TV commercials are designed to make me want to buy things. This is exactly like that. We have to talk to kids about how social media companies try to hook them in emotionally. So for example, FOMO. Does anybody know what FOMO stands for? Right, so fear of missing out, right? And FOMO was always there. I mean, FOMO was always there. But the difference is, it sort of wasn't in your face. Like, you used to wonder what your friends were doing, but you didn't know. And there was no way to find out in the moment. You might hear about it the next day at school. Whereas today, you're going to know exactly what they're up to. And what's really striking to me is how social media gets kids today any way they go. So for example, kids say to us, I worry when I find out my friends are having fun without me. So if I see them on social media having fun or looking like they're having fun, that makes me worry that I'm missing out. On the other hand, I get anxious or I worry when I don't know what my friends are up to. So you see, they get you coming and going now. If you don't know what they're doing, then you worry. And if you know what they're doing, then you worry. And this is one of the reasons we see anxiety increasing in children. On the other hand, when you're the child who's out or doing something social, you feel like it's really important to share it online. It feels really important. Then you have issues like Snapchat streaks. Does anybody know what a Snapchat streak is? Not educated. educators. You guys don't count. People who don't work with children, who just have them. Okay, so what a Snapchat streak is this? Snapchat streak is brilliant. It's like selling air. It's like selling something that doesn't exist. So here's what it is. If I Snapchat you and you Snapchat me back, that's 1 day, and I get 1 point. Every consecutive day that we communicate with each other through Snapchat, we get another point. So on this screen, you can see, for example, on the first one, 59 days they've been going on that streak. 59 days. They're going back and forth. Now, 59 is nothing, I'm going to tell you right now. Kids do Snapchat streaks that are like 400, 500. They'll go 2 years Snapchatting each other back and forth every day because they don't want the streak to break. Now, that could beg the question, why? What do you get for a Snapchat streak? You don't get anything. It's not like you get prizes or money. They don't send you a check. If you get a Snapchat streak, it's just something they don't want to break. And of course, it's brilliant because what Snapchat gets is you coming on to an app every day for 2 years. Well, you don't want the streak to break, excuse me. Now, here's the tricky thing. You and I might look at this and say, but that's not real. Like, you don't get anything for doing this. It's not real. But it feels real to kids. That's the important thing to understand. A Snapchat streak may be a totally made-up thing. It may be a thing where, it really doesn't get you anything concrete in the real world, but that doesn't matter from a psychological point of view. It still affects kids psychologically. So it's important not to denigrate them. What about the impact on their brain? So I'm going to make this simple because I really think that if you start doing things like reading articles in the New York Times about what screens do to your brain, like it can freak you out as a parent today. It really can. So I want to make this very simple and direct and to the point. While you're growing up, the best thing you can do for your brain is a variety of activities. That is the best thing you can do. So you don't want a kid who just goes to school, or a kid who just does screens or video games, or a kid who only does basketball. You want a kid that has more than one interest in life. This is what's good for their brain. So if you have a child that is only doing screens, that's not good. You want to encourage other interests. It can be anything. It can be art, it can be music, it can be debate, it can be mock trial, it can be model UN, it can be anything else. It can be the school newspaper. Do you guys have a school newspaper? The school newspaper. It can be anything else. You just want a variety of activities. That's what you can do as a parent to make sure that your kids grow up the healthiest, their brain health is as good as it can be. That's what you can do. Just worrying about screens is not going to help your child. But making sure they have a variety of activities will. Now, there are apps that can help you do this. So for example, Unglue is a really clever idea. And basically, Unglue lets you control device use in time per day, and kids can save up. So like if they know that there's going to be something they want to do, a big game they want to play with all their friends on Friday night, they can save up their minutes from other days to use then. Now this doesn't get around the whole thing, right? Because remember, there's lots of devices and there's lots of places, and they can just go somewhere else. But this can help you sort of teach your kids how to think about budgeting their time online so that they're doing other things too. Another thing that is important to understand about emotions online is that emotions escalate exceptionally fast when kids are in digital environments. And this can really have an impact on them psychologically. So when they are in a digital environment, a very small problem can escalate really fast into a big fight or something that's really, really upsetting. And so it's really important for kids to understand this and for you to talk with them about it, because we see a lot of problems that start out very small, and when you ask the kids, why did this escalate, they're kind of lost. You know, they can't really describe to you what's going on. When we come to schools, what we do is we teach kids something called the 24-hour rule. The 24-hour rule basically says, when you're upset, wait before you go digital. Wait before you text everybody. Wait before you post about it. Now, between you and I, strictly between you and I'm going to tell you that the 24-hour rule is a bargaining position. No modern child is going to wait 24 hours. It's not going to happen. You ask for 24 and you settle for 2. And that's fine. 2 is long enough for their autonomic arousal to come down for them not to be so upset. But that's really the goal of the exercise. Okay, speaking of exercising, let's talk about what actions parents can take to help kids sort of live in a more peaceable way, and for you and your family to live in a more peaceful way with technology. So the first thing you want to do is you want to have a talk about technology. And this is really important. Sometimes we call this the tech talk. It's not a talk about what buttons to push. It's a talk about how you're going to live with technology. That's what it's a talk about. So the first rule about the tech talk is the younger you do it, the better. The ideal time to do it is right before you are about to give them their first device. Because at that moment in time, children will agree to any stipulations you put on it. It doesn't matter what it is, they will agree to it. So that's the best time to do it, but really you can have it at any time. During the tech talk, there are a few key concepts you want kids to know. The first, the person who pays for the device is the person who owns it, not the child, you. It is your cell phone, it is not theirs. You are, out of the goodness of your heart, letting them carry it around, but it is not theirs. This is important because you should never hear the words, "I don't want to show it to you, it's mine," coming out of their mouth. Second, you want their responsibilities and their privileges to sort of rise and fall together. So you want kids to understand that digital technology is a privilege. Getting a new Android for Christmas is a privilege. Getting to carry it to school every day is a privilege. And when you get a new privilege, you also have a new responsibility. By the way, this explains why, if you have a rule in your house that says technology goes off at 9 p.m., you are still allowed to use your laptop. You have many more responsibilities, and thus you get many more privileges. It's very important to link these two things together, because that's how you teach children to be responsible, to make them understand that responsibility, you get something back for it. You get all these privileges. And believe me, I'm not telling you that having kids do chores makes life easier. It doesn't necessarily. But it's really a good practice to stick to. All right, other things to consider in the tech talk. Are you going to set time limits? This is a hard one, because how do you measure them? So back in the TV days, right, your mom could say an hour a day, 2 hours a day. The TV was sitting right there in the living room. But if they've got a cell phone in their pocket, what are you going to do? You're going to add up every text message? 10 seconds per message? And figure out if that adds up? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Skyping with their grandparents is not the same thing as playing a video game. Looking up things online, doing their homework, reading newspaper articles, these are all uses of technology you don't want to necessarily add into time limits. It makes it very hard. I think that instead of fighting over whether your child has hit that 2-hour limit, it can be easier to carve out pockets of time where technology is forbidden. So for example, you could say, no technology after 9 p.m. are no technology before school. You could do things like that, but there are other more specific ones. One of the first ones that I always think about is the idea that live people get precedence over devices. So if I, your mother, come to you and say, dinner's on the table, right, thank you, dinner's on the table, then I expect you to put your device down and come to the table. Second, the front seat of the car is, with the exception of GPS, it is a no cell phone zone. So that means that if I, your mother, I'm driving you to your activities, you're not allowed to sit in the front seat and ignore me and bury your nose in your phone. You're actually supposed to talk to me. This, by the way, is one of those times that you're going to use to build their social skills, so you want them to talk to you. And this is a really good rule in a lot of ways. I mean, for one thing, it prevents your child from treating you like a chauffeur, but also, you know, in a few years, your kids are going to be driving. And if they're used to the idea that there are no devices in the front seat, you're going to feel better. Believe me, you're going to feel better. Third, no devices at the dinner table. So most of us grew up with the rule that you're not supposed to answer the house phone during dinner, and we're just going to extend that. No devices at the dinner table. That includes you, by the way, and no peeking. And if your child is staring at their lap, they're not looking at their napkin. Okay? The lap stare is a giveaway. Fourth, if I call, you answer. That's a rule. You're using my phone. Remember that. If I call you, except when you're driving, you answer the phone. 5, if you're upset, don't go to your device. We talked about that already. 6, multitasking during homework. Every kid tells us that they can multitask and it does not affect their ability to learn. Every piece of research ever done on multitasking finds that multitasking affects your ability to learn. This is definitely one we have to educate the kids about. They don't get it. Finally, 7, sorry. If somebody asks you to turn off your phone, you should do it. That's just common courtesy. Now, of course, as I pointed out to you, you can have these rules. There is still access everywhere, and that can make it really tough to control these. But I do think it's important, even while we understand that we have rules and control's hard, that there's some things you still really want to think about drawing a line on. Not because you're going to be totally successful necessarily, but because it's important to teach your kids values about what kind of technology use isn't good. So for example, we know that kids younger than 13 are more and more likely to start using social media, and they're not supposed to be on social media. This is an FTC regulation, a federal regulation. So helping them fake it so that they can, fake their birthday so that they can go on social media is not a great idea. The other thing you want to keep in mind, I think, is that even if the school has problems with being able to enforce rules around digital use, they can still be very, very helpful. And you really want to think about how you're going to work with school when your child is having problems online. So there's a few things to understand. The first thing to understand is that schools can't tell you anything about another child. So if you were to go to Jen and say, this girl Harriet is bullying my daughter online on Instagram, making fun of her, there are limits to what any school personnel can tell you because of confidentiality. They're not stonewalling or protecting anybody. It's the law. The second thing to understand about working with the school is they can't always discipline. If the problem is happening only online, they may not have jurisdiction. However, it's worth it to point out that these problems often happen both in school and online, which brings me to my next point, which is that the school can always support a victim and keep an eye on a situation. So if something's happening online, let them know about it so they can be your eyes and ears. Because the odds are good that if it's happening online, it's also happening in school. And you want to know about that if that's happening. Now what about when you actually go to meet with people at school? A few things to think about. One is, don't get hung up on the label. If your child and a friend of theirs or somebody they know are having a problem online, don't get into an argument about whether or not it's bullying. It doesn't matter. The most unproductive thing I see is when parents and schools get into arguments about whether an issue is bullying or cyberbullying. Focus on the actual problem, not on the label. Second, you want to manage your expectations. There are other children in school. If your children go to school, they will see other children. There's no way to avoid that. And sometimes it's really hard when your kid is being targeted online, especially if they don't know who's doing it, and they have to walk around school feeling like everyone's watching them. That could be really difficult. But there's no way to send your kid to school and have them not see other children. Third, if you hold back information, then the outcome may be limited too. So, for example, if your child's being targeted online and you know they've had a problem with another child since 3rd grade, be sure to mention this to the school. They need to know the history. Finally, you should expect the school to follow up with you and your child when they're having a problem with somebody else. That is a totally reasonable expectation, and you should make sure it happens. All right. One of the trends I wanted to mention to you, and I'm almost done and then you can ask questions, is that in the United States, we've been tracking what we call biased bullying and cyberbullying, and these are incidents where kids post things or say things to other kids that have to do with prejudice or bias. So, for example, posting something about another kid who's of a different race or of a different religion. These kinds of incidents have risen dramatically in the last 2 years. And I think they've now risen to the point where, as adults, we all have to be conscious of this. We all have to be aware of it, and we have to be thinking about it, and we have to be talking to our kids about it. Because it's really shocking how common it's become. All right, let's talk about just a few family things, and then I'm going to shut up. First thing is, I'm going to make a pitch to you about eating dinner with your kids. Now, you may think eating dinner with your kids has nothing to do with technology use, but it actually has everything to do with it. When we measure kids who eat dinner with their parents, one of the things we ask them is, do you eat dinner regularly with your family? And also, when you do eat dinner, like, what's it like? Do you get mad at each other and everybody stomps off to their room? Or is it like totally, is it basically nice, you know? Like if you have teenage siblings, sometimes there's a lot of drama. And then we measured what kids were up to. One of the things we found was that even having cranky family dinners is better than having none. That having no family dinners really upped the chance, particularly online, of kids who engage in really antisocial behaviors. So I think that it's really important to understand that sometimes that family time seems like it's unrelated to digital stuff, but I don't think it's unrelated. I think it really does have an impact on how kids do this. You also want to pay attention to sibling relationships. I don't mean that your children should be totally lovey-dovey all the time, you know, and should just always be sweet to each other. That would actually be a little peculiar between siblings. But what you're looking for is the hot and cold, right? So your kids might get a quarrel, and then 15 minutes later you look up and they're like playing together, right? Like nothing ever happened. And that kind of thing is very typical. What you want to think about when you're thinking about kids who might be mean to their peers, especially online, you want to think about what your kids are like with their siblings, because siblings are your first peers. And if your kids get into a habit of constantly being mean to each other, then they're going to take that behavior out into the cybersphere with them. And they're going to start engaging in antisocial things. So it's a good idea, if you see that habit developing, to nip it in the bud and tell your kids that they have to speak civilly to each other. You can't require them to love each other, but you can make them behave, at least when you're around. And that's actually a really important value. The other thing I want to say is that I think it's really important every now and then to take some time off and spend time with your kids. And this is one of the things, it's really interesting. When we ask kids what they remember about being a teenager with their parents, kids whose parents did this with them have very intense memories of it. So once a year, play hooky from work, come to the school, tell Jen that your kids have a dentist appointment, pull them out and go do something fun. Once a year, nothing's gonna happen. They're not gonna miss anything critical once a year, I promise. And you know, you need that time with them. You really need it, and they need it. They really need it. You didn't hear that, Jennifer. Most important thing is to talk, and actually, this is the thing that predicts everything else. So parents who talk with their kid predicts everything else. It predicts parents that eat dinner with their children. It predicts kids who are more resilient. It predicts people who talk more about technology and social skills and social issues. So the most important thing is the root of the whole thing, which is just to talk with your kids about how they're doing and what's going on with them. Now, there are lots more resources online for parents. And we really ask you, they're all free and you can download them, and they deal with all kinds of technology and social issues. So please avail yourselves of them because we posted them up there for you. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Have a great night.